My name is Jennifer Wadella. I'm the VP of Front-End Engineering at the JavaScript consultancy Batovi. I'm an Angular GDE, a nonprofit founder, co-host of the Angular Plus Show podcast, and I'm a tech speaker and educator. One of the reasons I love speaking at technical conferences like this one is the opportunity to educate other developers and hear about their struggles. In my work in Batovi as a consultant, I also hear about the struggles my clients have, often with modernization practices and creating a better testing culture. So with that in mind, I'd like to tell you all a story. Once upon a time, in the software Patch Co., a little pumpkin worked on a pie-making application. She loved the product and loved the users, but releasing new features always felt like a struggle. The tests their product had were flaky and often hard to debug. The QA team and the dev team's only interaction was through an onslaught of Jira tickets at the end of every release cycle. It was impossible to update the front-end framework to the latest version without rewriting all the Selenium tests, and the development team was getting in trouble with compliance for not using a supported version. Sprints never left enough time for testing new features built, let alone tech debt cleanup or modernization efforts, and there was always finger-pointing in the sprint retrospectives. There must be a better way, thought the little pumpkin. So she went off in search of something better. She talked to lots of other developers about how they did testing at their companies. Some didn't know anything about how their testing worked. Some knew they only did manual testing. Some didn't test at all. But some could tell her all about their testing processes. "Haven't you heard of shifting left?" they said. They showed the little pumpkin a diagram. Your company is here, where most of your testing happens at the end of your process. When you shift left, you move testing to the left of the diagram, meaning testing happens earlier in the process. Testers are involved in the planning and design. They're able to ask questions, share their knowledge of critical paths, and make sure they really understand the requirements. They're involved in the development and building of the application, so they can plan for what happens when there's an API error, or maybe even remind the development team around UI designs for slow response times and empty states. When you shift left, testing is a part of the whole cycle instead of just being shoved to the very end. That sounds amazing, the little pumpkin said. Well, it gets even better. There are awesome tools that give you more testing control than ever before, like Cypress. You can even write tests in JavaScript. The little pumpkin was so excited. She skipped back to the software Patch Co. to share her exciting discoveries. She happily told everyone what she had learned about shifting left and how using Cypress could help them write better tests. Unfortunately, the other pumpkins weren't too enthused. They pushed back, saying they didn't have time to rewrite tests, that changing things would just be too hard, and they didn't want to have to use a new tool. Defeated, Little Pumpkin went back to her laptop, sighed, and opened the most recent regression ticket assigned to her. I think a lot of us can relate to the little pumpkin. We see problems with the way things are at our company, so we go out and we do all this research to find better tools and better processes to help us improve things. Excitedly, we bring that information back to our companies only to get shut down. People don't want to change, and companies are set in their ways. For shifting culture left, choosing the right tools is only half of the puzzle. If we want real change, we need to look at our culture as well as the tools we use. So today, I want to give you a roadmap of how to go about doing this and help your company shift left and adopt tools like Cypress so that you're not defeated like the little pumpkin. So let's talk game plan. I've got 4 steps for you to follow to help orchestrate change and shift your company left. The first step is to start with research, gathering information about where your company is. Next, we'll talk about getting buy-in and how to get key people involved. Then we'll talk about educating, making sure that everybody knows what we're doing and how to do it effectively. And finally, we'll talk about executing. How do we get started with this shift left culture change? And how do we keep momentum once we've gotten there? Okay, so first up, let's talk about research. In consulting, I joke with my consultants a lot about anytime they start a new client, putting on their anthropology hat. We like to go in and understand the environment and take times to figure out why they make decisions the way they do, what things matter to them, before even advocating for any changes. This is also a really useful strategy for culture shifting. So when it comes to research, we need to figure out a couple things. Number 1, who are the stakeholders? A stakeholder is defined as any individual, group, or organization that can affect, be affected by, or perceive itself to be affected by an initiative. And that perception part is really important. So if we are talking about making changes to a testing process, adopting new tools, who are the stakeholders that are going to be affected by these tools and strategy changes, or who is going to perceive themselves to be affected? We have a lot of different stakeholders, and this is going to change from company to company depending on how your team is organized, the things that they care about. But here are some potential stakeholders you might want to look into getting in contact with. There might be a technical lead on a project. You've got the developers themselves. There might be a QA lead. There might be existing automation engineers. There might be manual testers. There are possibly going to be project managers and product owners. These are all people who are stakeholders. If you're making any sort of big change in your testing process, they are likely going to be affected by it, or at least perceive themselves to be affected by it. The next group we need to identify are the decision makers. We need to know who has the power to actually greenlight tools and strategy changes. Example decision makers might actually be the same as stakeholders. They could be tech leads, they could be QA leads, they could be product owners. Product owners are a big one. They might be advocating for more feature development and don't want to allocate time to any, big process or structural changes. Your company might have some sort of internal review committee that wants to assess any tools or new methodologies before giving it the stamp of approval to use. Your company might have compliance officers, people who need to review tools or open source tech or anything that your team needs to use. So it's really important to have any of your decision makers identified, so when you go to start trying to make the changes that you want to see happen, you're not going to get roadblocked by somebody you weren't aware of. Part of the research is also understanding what kinds of things that stakeholders and decision makers care about. They're going to be motivated and driven by a bunch of different things. Sometimes these might be company objectives. There might be high-level goals that the company has. They might have budget-specific concerns. They might have a certain timeline for something they're trying to meet. They might have quality drivers. They might really care about the application performance, or in an ideal case, they're very highly motivated by user feedback. So figuring out who our decision makers are and the kind of things they care about are really, really important during this research phase. It's also really helpful to gather any statistics you can. I would encourage you to get comfortable with Jira, because this can be a great place to pull statistics from, or whatever sort of tracking system that your company might use. Some example statistics that you might care about are false failures, maybe reopen tickets. If you have really long test run times that are, causing problems with releases or wasting a lot of time while those tests are passing, that can be a really important statistic. If there have been significant missed test cases during deployment that has caused problems, that can be a good stat as well, along with release delays. A lot of companies are very motivated to get features out the door because they've promised them to users. And if they've promised those things on a certain timeline, they might be very, very motivated by the number of release delays that have been experienced. And if we can track those back to, problems with our testing process, that can be a really, really important stat to surface. So once we've done all this research, we need to take it and apply it. And that's part of getting buy-in. And this is how we bring everyone along. So we mentioned this a little bit before, but talking about what motivates stakeholders and decision makers. Hopefully you've been able to figure out what their drivers are, the things that they care about. And then we want to align the kind of change you want to make against the things that they care about. So how does building that testing culture that you want actually align with the needs and priorities of existing stakeholders and decision makers? So part of this means figuring out your selling points. You want to take the things they care about and show how shifting left and how adopting tools like Cypress is going to solve those pain points for them. And there's a lot of greatness that we see offered with adopting end-to-end testing tools. And one of those big selling points oftentimes is more automated tests and less manual tests. But if you have a QA team with a lot of manual testers, if you try and use that line to sell them on this change, they might view that as job insecurity and actively roadblock your efforts. So that might not be the best selling point for your company. If we know that flaky tests are an issue, they're causing a lot of, false positives, false negatives, and all sorts of things that are making your testing not reliable, that's causing a lot of time to go into debugging those, that could be a really important selling point. Hey, If we do a better job shifting left, if we have a better testing system that's more modern, that allows us to get rid of some of these pain points, we can have fewer delayed releases. So taking the offerings that are there from shifting left and bringing people to do testing earlier in the process, coupled with using tools like Cypress that reduce test flakiness or allow us to more easily debug tests can be helpful. We just have to line those up against the things that decision makers and stakeholders care about. It's also really important to explain the why. People are resistant to change. They don't want to do a lot of work. But if you can really hone in the why is this going to be better? Why is this going to help us? Why is this going to be better for the company? Why or how is this going to help us meet our objectives? That's a really, really important thing for people to have to understand in order to help kind of make change. And you need to bring these people along. You need to get the stakeholders and decision makers on your side, and making sure they really understand the why is a critical part of how to do that. So, one of the other things that's really important for getting buy-in is to understand how to talk to decision makers and stakeholders and understand what's going on with them. A lot of times, your decision makers are going to be people in leadership. They've got a lot on their plate. They've got a lot going on. Their calendars are really hard to get on. It can be hard to get responses from them via email or Slack. So if you kind of understand where their mindset is and understand how they're going about operating throughout their day, it can be helpful for you to get in front of them at the right place at the right time. So a lot of times they might be using this Eisenhower matrix, whether they realize they're doing that or not. But the Eisenhower matrix is kind of a way to prioritize what you have on your plate. It divides everything that you have into 4 different quadrants. So if we start in the lower right, we've got a quadrant for things that are not important or not urgent. We're going to throw that out the window. We don't want to be there. We want to be a place of importance. So next up, we have things that are not important, but they are urgent. These are things that might be something like scheduling meetings, dealing with a broken build, dealing with some sort of bug reported from our user. So these are things that are going to be urgent at a decision maker level, but not necessarily important for them to deal with personally. So this is something that they might allocate. From there, we move into the top right quadrant, which is going to be things that are important, but not necessarily urgent. And honestly, this is where process changes are going to live. Things like training, things like strategy and upgrades. So shifting left would definitely be a part of this. The problem is with this quadrant is we all agree that these things are important, but they don't always get acted on immediately. There might be priorities in here that get shuffled around. Maybe you have this great end-to-end testing movement that's going to get thrown out the window because your company decides to prioritize shifting to AWS instead. True story, I've seen that happen before. So understanding what is in that important but not urgent quadrant can be really helpful. So then we finally have the things that are both important and urgent. And these are going to be the front of mind things for people who are in decision maker roles. These are things like deadlines, really serious production issues, compliance requirements. So if you understand what's happening in both their important and urgent quadrant, and then you can showcase how shifting left and adopting modern testing tooling can get rid of some of these things in their important and urgent quadrant because it'll be solving those problems, that can be a really effective strategy. I guess the big thing to keep in mind here is, when you're trying to advocate for these changes, especially going from bottom up, you need to be aware of things that are on people's plates, and they might not be in a place to listen to you when you're ready to talk. And I don't want that to discourage you. I want you to be aware of what's happening at your company level and find those opportunities to showcase how adopting the shift left methodology and tools like Cypress can really help make things better, and then understand how to communicate that back to your decision makers. Another technique we can use is building a proof of concept. Some people are very, very visual. They can't deal in abstraction, so they want to see how things work. Cypress makes this really easy to do out of the box. You can get a prototype up and running. Maybe you pick a really important test case, or maybe you find an area of your code base that has really, flaky tests that were a pain point and very visible to a lot of people. And get a prototype up and running. Show them those pretty green dashboards. Show them the improved performance time. This can be a really, really great way to showcase exactly what you want to have happen and get that buy-in from people. One of the last things that's really important to do is soliciting yes ands, and this you may have heard of it before as kind of an improv strategy to help improv teams not shortchange their kind of construct that they're trying to push forward, or their idea or whatever that concept might be, by taking a yes and approach to leave that door open. And this is really important for orchestrating change too. So you want to do your best to invite others to the table. You have this idea, you think that shifting left is really going to benefit your company, you think it's going to make and bring about really great changes. While you're communicating that, make sure to ask other people what their thoughts are. Hey, what kind of problems are you having? Do you have ideas? Do you have feedback? Are there tools or approaches that you've explored that might be helpful? This gives people a sense of ownership and excitement about helping push this idea forward, and you're going to increase your surface area for knowledge by bringing in other voices to kind of help advocate for this change, and get their insights that you might not have had previously. So we've talked about how to get buy-in. We've talked about how to do the research to get that buy-in. Next, we need to talk about how to educate. I think we can all agree that Cypress has some pretty amazing documentation, but that's really just the starting point. I don't know if you ever read the Stack Overflow survey that they put out every year, but it's a survey that gets sent out to developers and engineering managers to ask questions about what tools they're using, what frameworks they're working with, what frameworks they want to use. But they added some new questions this year that I thought were really interesting. And these were questions that related to a user's ability to find knowledge and information within their organization. And these rung really true to me because I feel like I see these kind of issues popping up all the time in consulting, where developers internally at companies really struggle with being able to find knowledge and information within their organization, or on the flip side, find themselves answering questions repeatedly. So one of the prompts, I often find myself answering questions that I've already answered before. 35.9% of developers responded yes, they agree that this is an issue that they have. And so this kind of education effort is very, very time consuming, and especially if you're answering the same question over and over and over again, that can be a lot of work. So that kind of brings us to the importance of creating and maintaining internal documentation. So you might be in the Atlassian suite where you're using Confluence. Maybe you just have a GitHub wiki that you are having some sort of internal documentation in. Having a really central point for this information that everybody knows about is important. And as you're educating, as you're rolling out content, as you're using these different educational strategies, make sure that all that is contained inside of wherever this documentation is hosted. That might mean recording learning sessions and having the link available there. One of the techniques I really like to use are essentially PRs as education tools or documentation. So when you are kind of coaching developers or QA engineers on how to adopt new strategies, I really like using pull requests and leaving comments and saying, hey, this was a great first approach at this. Doing it this way might be a little more ideal. These are the reasons why. So you're helping along in the pull request process, but the cool thing is you can link back to that comment in the future. So the next time around, if a developer has a similar knowledge gap or is not sure how to handle a situation, you can say, hey, go check out this PR comment that I left over here, and kind of use that as documentation to help yourself along educating others. There are other education strategies that I think are really, really useful for bringing people along and helping them figure out the best way to do things. I'm a huge fan of lunch and learns. I advocate very strongly to schedule these at a weekly cadence. So these are a great place to present information. It could be, hey, here's how to write your first end-to-end test in Cypress. Hey, here are new features that we're going to be taking advantage of. Hey, here is a new process that we're going to adapt. Having that presented in an internal lunch and learn is really, really powerful. It can be intimidating to do these presentations on your own, especially if you're the one driving, advocating for this change and having to do a lot of that education yourself. But I would very much encourage you to democratize these lunch and learns. Ask other people to give presentations. Even if you're saying, hey, so-and-so, why don't you go figure out how this thing works, or take this test case and write some really good tests around that, and bring that back to the group. Having other people present and educate others in these lunch and learns is really, really powerful. Huge fan of pair programming. I think this is one of the best ways that we can help educate each other and our peers. Hey, here's a real problem we have to solve. Here's a real Jira ticket that it's tied to. How are we going to go about testing this? How are we going to write end-to-end tests? Are there any issues with this that are preventing us from writing good end-to-end tests? Those are really, really helpful things to do in pair programming sessions. I'm also a big fan of mob programming. We've used this extensively on our clients where we're trying to, take large development teams and educate them on end-to-end testing best practices, how to write better code with better hooks, for instance, and then how to write the end-to-end tests themselves. So we'll get a group of developers together and we'll say, hey, here's the issue that we're working on. We're going to start writing, and kind of encourage people to speak up and crowdsource, and especially to debug. I have my consultants not write perfect code right away. I'll have them kind of write code the way we would expect people to, and know that we're going to see bugs and errors, and then kind of help get the group involved of how to figure out what those errors are, how to debug them, and how to solve them at the end of the day. If you are a company that maybe has a lot of siloed teams, a lot of different squads doing different things, and you want to help, kind of embrace this shifting left strategy as a whole, it could be a really great idea to establish a shift left guild. And the goal here would be to reach those different silos of the company and make sure they at least have a representative involved to understand what's going on, what are the high level strategies, to really make sure that everybody is bringing best practices to the forefront, highlighting issues that they may run into that you haven't experienced in particular on your team, and crafting best practices around how to deal with that. It's also really great to promote outside learning. You don't have to take this whole education burden on your shoulders. There are a ton of great communities and meetups. We've definitely started to see the meetups coming back. I think post-pandemic, people are, opening up offices again. People are getting back in person, celebrating, getting excited. So looking for relevant communities and meetups to join for helping educate others on testing is really key. There's actually a lot of great events, webinars and all sorts of things. If you go to Cypress.io/events, you can see a whole list of upcoming events they have of different webinars and things like that. And you're already nailing this bullet point, attending conferences. So good job. You can check that one off your list. But those are all really great ways to help educate other people and bring them along for adopting this shift left methodology and new tooling. Okay, so finally, we need to talk about how to execute. So this means making a plan and tracking progress. So you're likely going to be doing a lot of new things, and so having a visual representation of that can be really, really helpful. I want to show a kind of sample diagram that we did for one of our clients. This client had a lot of different, essentially, teams running, working on different pieces of their software product. Everything was being done in a slightly different way. And so they came to us and they're like, hey, we think we really need some help with our testing strategies. We'd like to do something a little bit more modern and something that can be represented across all of our teams consistently. And so we took a look at their tools, kind of their needs, and this is the plan that we came up with that acted against. So it started with a user story in Jira. That's where they had all their issues logged. So one of the things that they did is they decided to use Cucumber to make their tests readable for everyone. So this meant, business analysts and project managers were able to read and understand the test just as well as the developers and testers. So they had their GitLab pipeline. Their end-to-end tests were ultimately written in Cypress. So that's what our consultants were teaching the developers and the testers how to do, is take these Cucumber tests and have those execute in Cypress. We had some mock service data that the team was using to help mock API calls to better test those different cases of API responses. And the really cool piece of this was all of this information fed back into Jira, into this really cool test report and widget. And this was really, really powerful. So, developers could see exactly what the status of the tests were, but the project managers and the business analysts had really good insight as well. So they understood what the status of a user story was, what tests were passing, what tests weren't passing. Everybody had this really great visibility into exactly what those tests were, and what that meant for the business. So, roadmaps like this are really, really helpful, having some sort of illustration or documentation to refer to, especially when you're bringing people along into kind of a big change like this. So part of what we need to do here is we need to actually start with project management. And I feel like this is an icky topic for a lot of people because I feel like a lot of times we feel very stifled by project management, when in reality it's we are stifled by poor project management, not the fact that project management exists. So sorry, off that little soapbox. But I want to give you two really powerful tools when it comes to project management to make sure that you are bringing testing further left in the diagram and having a really appropriate way to track that. So these are definitions that need to be decided on at a team level, but the important thing is to get everybody to agree on what these definitions are in order to understand how to move forward. So the first is the definition of ready. And the definition of ready means a story is immediately actionable. So, if it's made its way from the backlog into a sprint, anybody can pick up that story and work on it and have what they need to take that story through to completion. So it's up to you and your team to decide what that definition means, what needs to be there for somebody to be able to start working on that user story. That might mean, hey, we have fleshed out requirements. That might mean, hey, we know exactly what our test cases are that the developers are going to be developing against and the testers are going to start writing tests for. That might mean, design completion or design review or something like that. But the important thing is to look at your needs, your project needs, and create this definition of ready. Make sure everybody agrees on it, and make sure it's documented in your centralized, wherever your documentation is that we talked about before. The next is the definition of done. So definition of ready is kind of like the beginning. What do we need for things to be worked on? The definition of done is the gate that separates things from in progress to done. So coming, to an agreement on what your definition of done for a ticket in is really important. Does that mean, a certain number of unit tests are written? Does that mean, these end-to-end tests are written, these integration tests are written? Maybe it's certain testing criteria. Maybe it's passing a certain level of threshold. But sitting down with your team and your project manager and saying, all right, this is what we are going to consider an item to need to be considered done, and, making sure everybody is in agreement on that definition and it's documented. So making sure that you are capturing your new approach to testing, however you're going to bring it in your process and tackle it, make sure it is included in these definition of ready and definition of done. So with executing, we need to pick a starting point, and this can be really hard, and I don't necessarily think there's one right answer here other than just start somewhere. So a couple different examples you might care about are critical paths. A lot of times we feel like it's easier to get started with new feature work. So we see a new feature being developed. It's a lot easier for us to, showcase not only how to write better code to provide hooks for end-to-end testing, but can kind of be a fresh start to get things going there. This might mean a specific product lane. Maybe there's this team, they're really invested, they want to buy in, and so they're just going to take the work that they are doing in their product and kind of adopt this new methodology. Figuring out which of those is important matters to you. I will say on the new feature work, I feel like this is probably the easiest for a lot of companies. There was a client that we worked with in the past that they wanted to adopt Cypress and do some more modern end-to-end testing. And they were unable to upgrade their Angular framework. And that is because they were using Angular Material, which is a UI framework. This should not matter functionally, but they had all these very brittle Selenium tests that were hooked into the Angular Material end-to-end classes. And that meant that Angular Material, when they shipped a change to those, and these were just CSS classes, folks, so these were purely design, that when Angular Material changed those classes, all the Selenium tests broke. So we were unable to upgrade Angular because we could not upgrade Angular Material without all the Selenium tests breaking. And so it was a lot easier for us to kind of look at this and look at new feature development and say, okay, we'll get to fixing that later, but for now, any new feature work that we're going to do, we're going to make sure that we are writing, attributes for the testing team to hook into. We're going to show the testing team our code, and that way they can say, hey, I, need to test for this certain scenario and you didn't include me a hook here. And we can do that as a part of development process instead of waiting until, the very end of the sprint and panic and everybody's working on weekends and then we're grumpy and that kind of thing happens. We've all seen how that play out. So choosing the starting point and doing new feature work can be a little bit easier, and then you can start to, adopt better practices across the board and then start to work backwards, updating some of the older code. But big picture, pick a starting point and go with it. One of the other things that might be good starting point wise are to identify critical paths. If your company is looking to adopt new methodologies because you've got some significant pain points and you're actually losing customers from it, figuring out what those critical paths are within your application and starting with your modernization efforts for testing there can be really key. This could be something like your login process. If your if your users can't log into your application to do what they need to do, it's going to cause problems. Maybe there's a significant action or a significant workflow that's really important. If you're e-commerce, your checkout process is pretty damn important. If people can't pay for your product, you're not going to get paid, and then you don't have money for more end-to-end testing writing. I'm being a little bit flippant there, but I hope you catch my drift. So picking a starting point, really important in making sure everybody agrees upon it. The next thing that you want to do is track progress. When we talked about getting those stakeholders and decision makers buying in, they might have had to shuffle other priorities and they might be answering to some higher level leadership. And so they will want to know that the decisions that they have made have led to positive outcomes. So I would encourage you in this execution phase to also think about how are you going to track progress. So this might mean, recording your test cases and showing how they are running faster over time, how, less flaky they are. Maybe your development team is spending less time debugging these tests and they're able to move on and work on new features faster. So you want to make sure that you're tracking progress and you can go back and say, hey, this is what this accomplished. This is what our statistics look like before. This is what they look like now. This is why we should continue investing in this shift left practice. I think one of the other really exciting things about adopting some of these more modern tools is we can build on top of them and integrate them in ways that we've never done before. So, you're not just limited to what's out there right now. You can actually go about and you can build the tools that you need. My team uses the NX a lot, and it's not just for mono repos. We really love the tooling. There's a lot of powerful scaffolding and generators that our team takes advantage of. Our team has actually written a plugin on top of NX that'll allow you to really quickly scaffold a Cucumber project that you can integrate with Cypress or whatever you want. So there's a lot of power in, building kind of tooling and figuring out how to create things that are going to give your team a better developer experience. We use GitHub Actions a lot. There's a possibility that you're going to need to look at your deployment process, your CI/CD pipelines. So there's a lot of power with what you can do with GitHub Actions and integrating that and kind of helping further democratize the testing process. And finally, you can actually build your own Cypress plugins. There's a lot of great stuff done by the community already, but if there's something that's not meeting your needs, there's nothing saying that you can't go and take, the specific problem to your team or your organization and figure out how to build a specific Cypress plugin just for that use case. It's a really fun time to be a developer. If we can dream it, we can build it. So I would encourage you to make sure that you don't forget about that when going about executing on this shift left strategy. It's also really important when it comes to, tracking progress to documenting your wins. There are some things that are going to happen along the way that aren't necessarily quantifiable. We really like celebrating, for instance, people pushing their first PR or, doing some sort of bug-free release. And so if you can make it a part of your culture to just, say, hey, let's take a look at what we've done. We set out with this really big, ambitious goal to do this, shift left culture change. Make sure to document those small wins along the way. That first end-to-end test that was written, that first, test that was notoriously flaky, no longer being an issue, that first release that has a significantly fewer number of bugs. Like, document these and celebrate them because they all count. So I hope you are coming away from this with a good idea of how to help your company shift left and embrace modern tooling like Cypress. We talked about how to do the research to understand the problems of your organization. We talked about how to get buy-in from the people that matter with that understanding of our company. We talked about how to educate people and teach them how to do things the right way. And finally, we talked about how to actually start executing and track our progress. So I hope that this is going to help you help your company shift left and be happier little pumpkins. It's hard work. It's a hard fight, and it can feel very tedious and daunting sometimes. But that is what makes us great at what we do. That's what keeps us passionate about our craft, is pushing those boundaries, always trying to find a better way to do things. And so I hope you are going to walk away today excited on everything that you're going to hear about during the rest of this conference regarding Cypress and new features that are coming out, and have a great idea about how to get your company to embrace shift left culture and testing, and do it with really awesome tools like Cypress. So with that, I think I've left a couple minutes for questions, so you can drop those in the chat, or whatever kind of feedback gathering we have collected. If you think of anything after the fact or just want to get in touch with me, these slides are available at shiftingleft.jenniferwadella.com. And if you have been struggling to help your company adopt shift left, or are struggling with any of the things that our little pumpkin struggled with in her journey, I would love to hear from you. So my email is jennifer@batobi.com. Thanks so much. Happy testing.